Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Political Talk with JB. I am your host, Julian Boykin, and today I am joined by Mr. Phillip Ensler, who is campaigning for Lieutenant Governor of Alabama. Phillip, how are you doing today?
I'm great and good to be on with you. Appreciate you having me as a guest.
No problem. Tell everybody a little bit about your background and what has you campaigning to be the next Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, so I'm going to date back to my first job after college. I was a public school teacher in Montgomery, taught ninth grade world history, loved being in the classroom. At the time, I started a mentorship program that I've led for the last 14 years, where I bring students from Montgomery and now Birmingham and other parts of the state, bring them to Washington, D.C. to visit museums and tour colleges and meet with leaders. So working with young people, still a big part of the work and what I do, but I've always had a passion for law. So I went to law school, became a member of the Alabama Bar in 2017, have mostly worked on policy work since. So my real interest was in legislation and trying to implement good policy in the state. I then worked at the city of Montgomery as policy advisor and dealt with everything from public safety to small business related issues. And then ran for the legislature in 2022 and got elected and have been in there the last 4 years. And it's been an incredible journey and a privilege to serve the people of Alabama. And now running for lieutenant governor to build off of that record of service and continue trying to help make a positive difference in people's lives.
Great. For people that's watching that may or may not know, you actually have a job as a lieutenant governor. Most people from the outside looking in, they just think, oh, this is the second in command. If something happens to the governor, lieutenant governor steps in next in succession. But can you talk about the duties and responsibilities of a lieutenant governor?
Yeah, great question. And I get that everywhere I go throughout the state. People say, can I tell them what it does? So a couple things. One, the lieutenant governor presides over the state senate. So the lieutenant governor, and anyone who's watched the state senate in action, the lieutenant governor literally sits there on the floor, essentially presiding over it, and somewhat plays the role of referee on bills that come up and some of the debate that happens. But that's part of it. A huge part of it then is appointing people to boards and commissions. So there are all sorts of boards and commissions in the state that deal with industry and healthcare and issues that are impacting people in the state. So the lieutenant governor appoints people to some of those boards and commissions. But then a really important part of it that I think is underutilized that I would really focus on based on my relationships with legislators already is advocating for bills to come through and working to bring senators together to pass legislation. The lieutenant governor himself can't introduce a bill or pass a bill, but I have great relationships with senators already. So I would work with them to try to get priority bills introduced, try to get enough votes, and really have what I would call a policy portfolio. So using the role to advocate. And then outside of that's during the legislative session, but outside of it, the lieutenant governor, can do a lot as far as traveling the state, raising awareness about issues, going to DC, trying to help secure federal funding for roads and bridges and important initiatives. So I see it not just as a part-time role, but something that really full-time to serve the people of Alabama.
Well said. When we talk about healthcare, it's a hot topic in Alabama. A lot of people are advocating that we expand healthcare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is a major issue throughout the state, particularly though in rural counties. And I hear from people so often that don't have a hospital in their county. They don't even have an emergency room. People are having to drive 1 or 2 hours to get to a hospital for an emergency, or if it's a woman delivering a baby, there's not a delivery and labor in their county. So it's a big concern for Alabamians all over. One way we can address it, and different terms have been used over the years, and Medicaid expansion is one way to help bring in revenue and funding that can help keep those hospitals open. And let me just quickly say this about it, that at the end of the day, it's about helping the people of our state, and it's about Medicaid expansion is insurance for working class people. So it's people that have to have an income, that are working hard. They're not eligible for regular Medicaid. So it's really about helping those that are working the hardest, but having a hard time paying their insurance premiums. So it's a way to help them. And whatever the background is on it, I know it's, for years there's been back and forth on it. At the end of the day, it is an important way to help keep hospitals open. So I certainly would advocate for that. Another, though, major way we can address it is I would call for a state level hospital prevention closure fund. And we find money to fund all sorts of things. I can't think of something more important than putting some money into a state fund if a hospital is on the verge of closing or they need a lifeline to help stay open. Helping them for a little bit, and they need to be fiscally responsible. They need to manage their finances well. But that kind of prevention closure fund is really important. And I would add in, as well that recruiting doctors, nurses to some of these rural areas, there are lots of different great programs that can help bring them into these areas, even if it's for a few years right out of medical school. I would focus on those kinds of programs to bring those services into the counties where there's a lack of services.
When we talk about healthcare, we can also incorporate mental health. What is your plan as it relates to mental health for the people of Alabama?
Yeah, that is again another really important issue, and it affects. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, lower income, or affluent, rural, urban. Mental health can affect everyone. It impacts our veterans in a disproportionate way. I'm really glad that at the legislature, in my time there has been a strong focus on that, and I give a lot of credit to Speaker Ledbetter in the House. He's focused on mental health. I partnered with Danny Garrett, the Education Budget Chair, and Arthur Orr up in the Senate. We secured funding for a telemental health program. So that funding starting next year will be a mental health program where students all over the state, but especially in rural areas, can get on an iPad or computer, tablet, and have a mental health counseling service. They're often not counselors in those counties, or they can't make it to an appointment after school. So I would build off of that record. I would work with colleagues to continue to get funding in the budget. Again, as Lieutenant Governor, I couldn't do that myself, but what I can do is ask the senators, ask the House members, ask the Speaker, to put those things in the budget. So that's a really big part of it. Right now, they're mental health coordinators in every school district, so I want us to expand on that. And then another big issue is just having access to crisis care centers. If a person's having a family member in a mental health crisis, they don't always know where to bring them. Maybe it's a hospital, but in some places they don't even have a hospital. So expanding those throughout the state, I would work very closely with the State Department of Health and particularly mental health, to try to expand access to those kind of crisis centers. And again, the Lieutenant Governor, can't wave a magic wand and do those things on his own. But the partnerships I have already with those agency heads, with those legislators, with on the ground level, county commissions, it takes that collaborative effort to get it done.
Great. When we talk about our veterans and making sure that we create programs to support them and, their sacrifice that they made to this country, what is your program on helping veterans in Alabama?
Yeah, let me first say this. I mean, Alabama is an incredibly military-friendly state, and that's something that we should continue to build on. I'm really glad right now in my legislative district. I'm proud that Gunter Air Force Base is in the district. So I have a lot of current military personnel, but also veterans who have enjoyed Montgomery and have retired here. And the Lieutenant Governor presides over what's called the Military Stability Commission. And that is so important to help keep our military bases in the state, but also really focus on the quality of life for our veterans and everything from mental health services for them to making sure that there's access to affordable housing for veterans. A lot, after their service want to then go into the workforce and need to be trained on a particular skill. So we should have programs. There are things that we've done at the legislature where if a veteran wants to become a teacher, for example, or go into law enforcement, there are different ways to help either accelerate or translate some of the things they've learned in the military, translate that into a state certificate or meet the qualifications. So those kinds of programs are so important. And I would be proud to continue to lead the Military Stability Commission as well as really focus on our veterans.
When we talk about affordability for the state of Alabama, it's no secret. Gas is going up. The cost of groceries have gone up. How do we bring back affordability for the people of Alabama?
Yeah, that is the number one issue I hear from people. I mean, and just struggling paycheck to paycheck, trying to make ends meet. So one is cutting the grocery tax. And look, I, in my time at the legislature, have supported cutting it. We had a 2-month holiday this summer where the grocery tax went away for 2 months, but we absolutely should make it permanent. And I would continue to the way I voted for tax cuts in the legislature. I would work with the legislature to try to get that through. Another big way to put more money in people's pockets is exempting taxes on overtime. And for a year, we had that where people working hourly jobs that are then putting in extra hours to provide for their families, put food on the table. We had a year in which those anything they made overtime, they didn't have to pay taxes on. But then that tax cut went away. I was proud of, I co-sponsored legislation last year, led by Minority Leader Anthony Daniels, where I signed on to making that tax cut permanent. There's no reason why we should be penalizing people that are working extra hours. We should put more money in their pockets by exempting those taxes on overtime. So that's a major one. But then we should also look at the overall, tax code and tax structure and make sure, that working class people, whether it's on the income tax or other, areas that they're not being overly burdened. I've proposed, and we can get more into this topic, a state lottery. And I've said that we should use part of the proceeds to send people a check back and send them a check where they can help, call it a Alabama, stimulus or whatever you want to call it, but help them pay their grocery bills, their gas bills, and taking that revenue, sending it back to people is another way that can help in a tremendous way. But the last thing I'll say, as far as helping people, with their bills is that, wages and increasing the minimum wage. Alabama is so far behind on that, and people just aren't making enough. I mean, right now, if you work an hour, that's maybe enough to go get you a soda and a bag of chips, or get an energy drink and a pack of gum, and maybe add in a candy bar. But it really doesn't, working a full hour doesn't really go that far. So raising that minimum wage would be so important to help put more money in people's pockets.
When we talk about small businesses, you can tell that there is a dire need for small businesses to be created, as well as more small business programs to help current small business owners. What is your plan to ensure that Alabama can create more small business owners in the state?
Yeah, so when I was at the city of Montgomery as policy advisor, that was one issue that I focused on. And what we found on the local level was that someone can have a great idea. They can be a entrepreneur. They can want to start a lawn mowing business. They could want to start open up a coffee shop. I mean, there are all these great ideas, but then when they start to have to go through the permitting process and they have to pay all these fees and there's all this red tape and all this bureaucracy. So on the state level, what I would want us to do is look at, when it comes to the state permitting and licensing process, if for certain, especially for certain fields, people need to get approval. And of course, if it's health related, if it's food, if it's cosmetology, I mean, there have to be basic requirements in place for someone to meet. But we should really look at, when there's unnecessary red tape, unnecessary bureaucracy. But what would also help is to have, meet people where they are and have, whether it's webinars, whether it's on the ground training sessions where we say, hey, you have an idea, we're going to bring officials from the state to your county instead of them having to always come to Montgomery and, go, find parking downtown, which is hard. We should bring state officials into counties. And maybe it's once a month, and we say, hey, we'll come and advise you on how to, go through the state to help get your business started up. Of course, from a tax perspective, we should always be looking at making sure that small businesses are not overtaxed in any way. But then the last thing I would add in is that through an educational standpoint, whether it's in high school, community colleges, four-year colleges, encouraging there to be small business development, encouraging, young people on how to learn, what it takes. You have to file taxes with the IRS. You have to go through the local and state permitting processes. So even just doing a basic education course on that, could be really helpful.
When we talk about our young people and trying to get our young people more involved, we have to look at what opportunities do young people currently have, and what opportunities can we create for our young people. One, so they can, you have a lot of young people that graduate high school, either go trade or go to college, and some of them may have to leave the state due to lack of opportunities. How do we create more opportunities for our young people so they can stay right here in Alabama?
Yeah, and look, as someone who I mentioned in the beginning, started my career as a high school teacher and have worked with high school students in particular ever since, for the last 14 years. And to your point, I've had students of mine that have gone on to four-year colleges. I have students that have gone on to get master's degrees and law degrees. I have former students of mine who went into military service, and then I have former students who went right into the workforce. And it's all about having access to all those different opportunities. I would say for the traditional, college approach, in proposing a state lottery, I've also said that part of the revenue should be used for college scholarships. You look at surrounding states, and they help pay in-state tuition for students who, particularly if they meet a certain GPA. So, I've advocated for that. I would certainly continue to work on the state Senate. The Senate was one vote short of a gaming package. So I would work with the senators to try to get that one additional vote and have some of the revenue go towards a college scholarship. When it comes to trades, for so many young people, they're skilled, they're artists, or they're good at like say cosmetology and cutting hair or being in a salon, being a great car mechanic, and we're doing a better job in Alabama, but they're not always introduced to that in high school. And there's not enough of that opportunity. So I would support, things like paid apprenticeships. So saying, hey, yes, go get the training in a classroom, but also partner with businesses, partner with companies. We have great car manufacturers in the state, and car plants. Let's work with them to have those apprenticeships where young people are already starting to get paid at a young age while on the job training. And then, of course, with the military, making sure that young people, that they have for the ASVAB in particular, when they have to study for that exam, they're young people that want to go into the military. They have that patriotism, they have that commitment to service, but need a little bit of help as far as studying for the ASVAB and getting a good score on that. So having a little bit more tutoring and support around that, would be really important. But the last thing I'll say, with young people is exposure. And that's why, the program that I lead, and this is, in my personal capacity, but I would love to see more of those kinds of programs where young people are brought on college tours, where they have access to ACT counselors, where they do go and meet with different professionals and really get to see hands-on and then have those mentors, have those connections. I'd love to see the state support more of those programs.
Let's stay on our young people and let's look at our schools. Alabama is one of those states. We have our fair share where, hey, administrators, SRO, school resource officers, they may find a gun in someone's book pack, backpack, things of that nature. How do we ensure our children's safety as it relates to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools? How do we ensure that safety for them?
Yeah, and it's such a important issue, and I know so many parents who every morning pray that their child returns home safely. There are so many parents and families that is they think all day long about, is my child safe, and ways that we do that are have a strong school safety plan and fund that. So that's everything. And every school district, every particular school is different. But I think in general, making sure that there are metal detectors, making sure that schools have a plan where a back door can't be popped open, that someone can sneak in. Having policies in certain schools like a clear backpack, so when someone's going in, they can see what it is, and also just raising awareness of educating parents on what if they do hear a child talking about bringing a gun to school, what are the ways that they should report it, making sure that there is a counselor or principal that they know that they can reach. And some of that, the state can't dictate and force all of that, but the state has done a good job so far of having some strong school safety plans. But I think continuing to support that, continuing to provide state funding, the SROs, are they're a huge presence in the schools, and young people get to know them, and continuing to support those kinds of programs is so important. But I think looking at what the state has already done and making sure that we build off of that is really important.
You mentioned the lottery earlier in our conversation. I wanted to touch on that a little bit because when I look at a state like Tennessee lottery affords, I think, high school graduates a scholarship. It's not a full ride, but it is a scholarship for all high school graduates. And I look at the funds that are generated from the lottery itself, it could help out Alabama tremendously. Can you talk a little bit more about your support for Alabama, going into that direction of having a lottery and how it could benefit the states for those that may not understand how much revenue the state of Alabama is missing out on when we look at other states that have the lottery?
Yeah, let me say this. I'm not I'm not a big gambler, or, I don't know that maybe once in a blue moon I would buy a lotto ticket. But the reality is that people are crossing state lines, and it's money that's going to Tennessee and Georgia and Florida and Mississippi. I mean, it's happening. So we can either be in denial and say, well, we're not going to do that in Alabama, but we're just missing out, and it's foolish to miss out on that. People then sometimes ask, they say, well, what about those who have a gambling or addiction, or have a problem where they're going to get hooked on it? Look, we sell tobacco, we sell alcohol. We don't prohibit things just because people may get addicted, and there should be really good addiction services that should be funded, should that be an issue. But I don't think that is reason to entirely not have it. And to your point, I mean, for young people, I hear all the time they're struggling to afford college. They're struggling to go and get a technical degree. They get into college, but then they're having a hard time, being able to afford gas. If they live, say, in Montgomery, and they go to Auburn or Tuscaloosa, and they're trying to get back and forth, they can't afford, the gas or a car. So a scholarship, even if it's not a full ride, would help and make a huge, huge difference. So I last year in the legislature proposed a lottery bill to give voters a chance. So the legislator can't on its own enact a lottery, but it's a constitutional amendment where voters would have to approve it. So why not give the people of Alabama a voice, give them a say, let them vote on it. So I would absolutely continue to push for that. Would continue to work with the House and the Senate, colleagues on both sides of the aisle to try to get that through, to bring it before voters. And to, one other point I would say is estimates vary on how much it can bring in, but on the low end, at least a few $100 million. And we certainly don't want to raise taxes on people, so let's go ahead and go another route to bring some of those funds in.
Correct. If people want to get in contact with you, ask additional questions, make a donation to your campaign, how can they do so?
Yeah, so PhillipEnsler.com, PhillipEnsler, and my email address is on there. I respond to emails, so if you reach out, I will get back to you. There's a donation link on there, and look, campaigning statewide costs a lot of money, and I'm not, I'm raising a lot of grassroots money, $10 donations, $25, $50. I don't have big time, groups that are sending huge checks my way. So every little bit makes a difference. I respond to the people, and people giving can make a big difference, and make sure, that at the end of the day, we're able to run a strong race and get this message out.
Last question. Why should the people of Alabama vote for you as the next Lieutenant Governor?
I would be honored to be the next Lieutenant Governor of Alabama. I have a long history of service. As I said in the beginning, starting as a public school teacher in Montgomery, then as an attorney, working on legislation, statewide legislation, and also then on the local level in Montgomery, trying to help improve people's lives. And then these last 4 years as a state legislator, I've done things like secure funding for a mental health program. I've passed legislation to help with public safety. I've supported our teachers. I've supported things that put more money in people's pockets and cut taxes. So I know how to get it done. I'm not walking into the state house having to learn the ropes and having to build relationships. I know how to get it done. I'm in it because I care about serving people. I care about making a difference in the lives of all Alabamians. I will serve people of all backgrounds, of all parties. So I certainly ask for your vote and support in November, and let's do everything we can to move our state forward and make sure that we improve your quality of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Phillip Ensler, candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Alabama. Phillip, thank you for your time and best of luck in your campaign.
I appreciate it, Noah, and thank you for keeping voters informed. It's so important to have these kind of longer dialogues. It really helps get the information out. So thank you for what you're doing.
No problem. You have a great day.
You too.